Hi, I'm Reggie Turner. I'm here with Jim Miller, and the FlipSide starts right now. Welcome to the show. Tonight, Jim, is just you and I. Terrence is on more paid time off, which I don't believe he has any left. But
no, he doesn't.
He has left us anyway.
Terrence has left the building.
But to jump right in, Jim, let's talk a little bit about this website we discovered called Neighborhood Scout that looks at the demographics of communities across the country. And one of the things that we had honed in on that we wanted to talk about tonight is kind of crime. There was another article that we had come across showing that crime was going down in the state of Maryland. But this is showing some alarming numbers of where Hagerstown sits in regards to the rest of Maryland and some of the trends that are a little troubling, especially at a time when our city is under revitalization efforts and really trying to move on past the impacts of COVID and redefine itself downtown. But the biggest thing that I saw here in the headlines of this, and this is neighborhoodscout.com, in regards to the city and annual crime, it looks like the annual crime numbers is roughly about 1,278 crimes a year, and the distribution between that is about 293 that are violent crimes and 985 that are property crimes. And per 1,000 residents, there's about 6 violent crimes per 1,000 residents, and about 22, or let's round up and say 23 crimes per 1,000 residents when it comes to property.
Yeah, specifically 6.74 round up to 7 violent and 23 property crimes.
Yes. Now the numbers on their face, it's hard to tell whether they're alarming, but if we expand that out and look at the state of Maryland itself, when you're looking at violent crimes, the number in the state of Maryland, let's round up from 3.96 to 4. So the city of Hagerstown is at 7 per 1,000 citizens. The state of Maryland is at 4.
Right.
So that jumps out as a little bit alarming in regards to our levels of violent crime. And then also, you know, the next part says, well, what are your chances of becoming a victim of violent crime in Hagerstown? It's 1 in 148, but in the state of Maryland, it's only a 1 in 253. So from this standpoint of looking at crime from this vantage point, and again, this doesn't dig into crimes to see, you know, because I would imagine that a lot of crime is between acquaintances or those that know each other, you know, not as if you're going to walk down the city streets and be carjacked or anything of that nature, but still looking at this relative to the rest of the state, not a good look.
No, it's not. So the question becomes, we have made some, so actually let me back up. No, it's not. It absolutely is not. There's some alarming statistics here. The one that I found most alarming, frankly, was that the crime index, where 1 is not good at all to 100 is the safest, our crime index percentage is 11. Yeah, that's not healthy.
Right.
Now, that said, and we'll get into the statistics, but what I want to get back to, whether we do it now or whether we do it at the end of this segment, is how will this investment that's being made into our city, the Maryland Theater, some of the other, the stadium project, some of the other projects that are going on. We know, or we hear, and I don't have historical crime rates, but what I have heard from the mayor and others, former mayor, is that the crime rate in Hagerstown is actually going down. There are pockets of things that may be going up, but the crime rate overall is going down, is what I'm told. I don't have any hard evidence to prove that, but that's what I'm told. If that's the case, is this a case of if you build it, they will come, or maybe if you build it, they will stop doing things? Criminals don't usually like to do things in the broad daylight, and they don't like to do things in crowded areas. Is there an argument to be made that if we get more feet on the street, that might help this situation?
I believe that there would be. I mean, because if you think about the East End and a lot of the crime that you see around the the parking deck where the old hospital used to be. I mean, these are pretty much abandoned areas. There's not really much happening in those areas. I would like to think that developing downtown would drive, and more foot traffic would drive away crime. But to your point in regards to the argument that crime is going down in Hagerstown, the supporting article that we have is saying that crime is going down in the state of Maryland as a whole. So if crime is going down, that's a good thing. But if you're still worse than the rest of the state,
I get that, and especially for what most would call a rural area,
right? And your crime index says that your crime rate is only better than 11% of cities in the country. That's problematic. The other, and when you look at crime, obviously a lot of it is centralized around property. Violent crime is significantly lower, but however, when you compare it to the rest of the state, it's still elevated. And when you look at it in regards to murders, it is low on the list in regards to murders, but just the overall crime is an issue here. And there's some other numbers to dig into. Was there anything else in this report that really caught your eye?
Well, and I think, so you had mentioned the relative chances of becoming a victim of violent crime, 1 in 148 in Hagerstown, 1 in 253 in Maryland. That number is a little further apart if you look at chances of becoming a victim to property crime, right, which is 1 in 44 according to this report in Hagerstown versus 1 in 63. So we're 19 points down there, not in the good way. So I thought that was an interesting one as well.
But looking at us compared to, and our population, the city's population of 43,000 compared to 331 million of the U.S., per 1,000, we are above the national average, not just the state. But if you scroll down to the middle of the page, our murder rate is 0.09. The United States is 0.07. Our rape rate is 0.62. The United States is 0.43. Our robbery rate is 2.07. The United States is 0.61, so our robbery rate is really out of whack. And then you look at our assault rate, which is 396, and then you look at the U.S. population where it's only 284. So we're significantly worse, as a country in all of those. And the other thing that this report would not speak to is the devastation of the opioid crisis on our community, how much of that is impacting these numbers. And it makes me worry for, as weather warms up in our communities and where things will head, because for me, I see two things that are happening kind of simultaneously. Obviously, the weather is warming up. We have the impacts of inflation, and we have the economy slowing down, which normally sends more people in despair and crisis. And from a broader level, we're starting to see a lot of the COVID money has dried up. The city announced that, utilities will start to be cut off again and those type of things. So, there's a lot of things that are happening within our economy along with the opioid epidemic that really there hasn't been a dent put into that can adversely affect these numbers.
Yeah. Here's the other thing that you have to look at, and this is something that former mayor, current councilman Bob Brucci used to talk about on this show all the time. This particular study looks at, frankly, the zip code 21740, 21742, not the corporate limits of Hagerstown,
right,
or the city center of Hagerstown. Because one of the things that I noticed was they say the safest Hagerstown neighborhoods are places like Robinwood and Leitersburg and Chewsville. So the demographic or the geographic expanse of this particular study or set of statistics is wider than what we would traditionally
Well, it's a
call
little
this
confusing
city.
from this standpoint, though, because they do cite those neighborhoods in one part, but if you look at the population, it says 43,000.
Yeah, right.
So it suggests the population is more in line with the population of the city, as opposed to including those areas that are not within the city.
So arguably, if that's the case, if 43 is the population of the city, but they're looking at something outside of the city, that's going to skew their statistics. You would agree?
It would, but to me, I would feel that it would skew the statistics downward, because in the city is where you have your largest concentration of people.
Well, you do, but if you have crimes, every crime outside of the city, of the downtown limits that is attributed to the city, it's attributed to, it's like we're counting the criminals, we're not counting the citizens.
Right.
So that's my concern. It was interesting. You can actually look for other communities on here. I noticed Boonesboro, Keedysville, Morgansville, Smithsburg, St. James, Williamsport, Halfway, Chewsville. So there's a lot of other areas that you can look at in this report. So it's very interesting.
Yeah.
But I thought it was worth sharing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would imagine any developer or business person that would be looking at this area would be looking for websites like this, looking for this type of data in regards to the decisions that they will be looking to make. So, us talking
and
about...
quite frankly, I found this through a Google search, and it was the first thing that appeared on the Google search. So clearly, they're doing something to make them come high in when I put in crime statistics, Hagerstown, Maryland.
That means it's something that's been
This is what
searched.
This is what appeared first. So,
Right.
Clearly that's the case. Let's get back for a second, though, to the thought process of if you build it, they will leave. I mean, have we seen precedent for that in other communities? I think we have, right?
Of course we have.
I mean,
I
going
think
back years to the Inner Harbor before all of the work was done there, that place was horrible. Now,
or when the National Stadium was built,
there you go.
there's another example. But then the issue becomes what happens to that population, because again, the other thing that we deal with that's embedded in these numbers is poverty, right? So the city as a whole has a 25% poverty rate. As you try to expand and draw in more middle class, then what becomes of that population? What comes of some of the fixed income senior facilities? There's one right across the street from where the ballpark is going to be. There's another downtown. So what happens to those places? How do they get sorted out?
That is far beyond my capacity to envision at this point, but I trust our elected officials, both at the city level and the county level and even at the state level, will be talking about those issues going forward. The point, though, is that the hope, and I think this is what I've heard various elected officials say, and I hope they're right, and I believe they're right, is that this growth will put more feet on the street and could flush out some of these bad elements.
And we've talked about things like this before from the standpoint of what is going to be the impact of some of the things that are happening in the county on the city. What is going to be the impact of the medical school on the city of Hagerstown? What's going to be the impact of the Hitachi plant? It is going to bring in more college educated individuals. And more individuals with specialized skill sets. So it will change things within our city, and obviously with higher incomes, to be able to support the influx of these new things that are coming. Because looking at the city and their budget and their proposed budget and how they're spending money, you're going to need an influx of people that are going to be able to help support
Absolutely.
their projects and their wishes and the bonds that they're going to issue and how those types of things are going to be supported.
Yep.
So this is very interesting. I mean, obviously the numbers are alarming any time where on a scale of 1 to 100 your community is the 11, and it really doesn't matter if you're shrinking it down and looking at the city of Hagerstown or you're expanding it out and looking at some of these outer areas. that's not a good thing, because I don't think you could take those outer areas out and say that the city will score better.
I don't know. It depends on what falls across. It depends. I can't say that.
Well, I would venture to say that from the standpoint, the concentration of poverty is in the city of Hagerstown.
That's true.
So if you have a concentration of poverty and an opioid epidemic, those things speak to the crisis when it comes to crime.
Yep.
And those type of things. So,
all right.
Anything else you glean from this?
I think we've covered it.
You got it covered, right? Well, hopefully, with the stadium that will be completed late next year, I know that the city is projecting that their project is going to be done, but that's not really in the core of the city. But we'll see what the impact of this. But and we still don't know what ancillary projects may be coming in to support what's happening with the stadium. But hopefully, if we build it,
they will come.
Those that we want to come will come, and right,
and the others will leave.
The others will leave, or the services will be provided for them to live a more productive and healthier lifestyle.
Yep.
All right. Well, Jim, we got a few more topics to talk about around the state, but let's take a quick break and come back and piggyback on some of the other things we wanted to cover tonight.
Excellent.
All right. Stay with us. We'll have more of the flip side after the break. Welcome back to the show. Well, Jim, we're getting close to the end of the legislative session. Things are moving fast and furious in Annapolis. I believe Sunday is next week. I know that the capital budget has left budget and taxation, and that should be passed tomorrow.
Tomorrow being Thursday.
Tomorrow being Thursday, as my sources explained. So as of the airing of this show, the public very well may know a lot about what's in the capital budget. The operating budget has already passed.
And when is the end of session?
I believe that is Monday or Tuesday of next week. I can't remember, but we're down to about 4 or 5 days that are left in session. So you have fast and furious more bills that are moving their way through the system.
Yeah, the last I looked, there was over 1,500 bills that were introduced. And think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
1,500 bills.
Now, all of them don't make it out. Many of them don't make it out.
No, I'm sure. No, absolutely they don't.
But
still,
it's a lot of
1,500
work.
bills for a single state.
Yeah, it's a lot of work.
And if you read them,
there
are some pretty crazy ones in there too.
There are some crazy bills, and luckily we have smart enough politicians that many of them don't move very far. And after next week, we should be able to come back and analyze some of the bills that our local delegation put forward, what they were successful with, and some that they may have to kind of clean up, and looking at that. I've had an opportunity to look at that. I know that Senator Quarterman has been able to have some bills passed. Looking at Delegate Grossman, it doesn't look like any of her bills that she sponsored directly made it out of committee for the most part, but that's not anything that I think is out of the ordinary for a freshman. Because when Delegate Cham was there, I don't believe that
she had anything come out the first.
Move.
No.
She did have some bond bills that did come back to the community, and tomorrow when we see the capital budget, we'll see if Delegate Grossman and also Senator Quarterman, what they were successful with in regards to bringing home, in regards to bond bills and what may be in the capital budget. Thinking of the capital budget, some things of interest to me would be, I know that Governor Hogan had an allocation of money in there for Meritus in regards to the new medical school. I believe that was pulled out by the Moore administration, so it'll be interesting to see if that's back in the budget. I've heard there's optimism that the money for I-81 is staying in the budget. I had talked to Senator Quarterman. I knew it was going to be a fight to kind of keep that in the budget. They were trying to pick away at that. And if it was left in the budget, was it left in the budget in full, or were some dollars trimmed off of that? So those are some big ticket items.
So there was 1,305 bills in the House so far. There are 979 bills in the Senate so far. So
a
lot of work going on down there.
A lot of work.
So it'll be interesting to see which of those which of those make it through. Now, when they pass a bill, it doesn't go into effect immediately, which I don't know whether
I think
our viewers.
I think the bill goes into effect the
July
beginning of
or
the
October?
fiscal year. I believe so. I think
I
it's
think there are some
July.
that, well, July is the beginning of the fiscal year, but I think some, at least in the past, have waited till October 1st as well, if memory serves.
Because I believe, thinking about this July, I do know that recreational marijuana will be coming. I believe in July. That will be out in July. So, from a business standpoint, that's going to be interesting, right? How are entrepreneurs going to be able to capitalize off of the fact that, recreational marijuana is going to be legal? So that'll be interesting to see what opportunities come out of that, and how does that change our community? Will we be walking down the street smelling smelling the weed, man? As we do when we go to other cities like New York and places of that nature. So it'll be interesting to see like how that's integrated into our everyday life.
So, one of the things that I found interesting as I was doing some research for this particular topic on the internet was the most viewed bills, and there's actually a list of them, the most viewed Maryland bills. At the top of the list was Senate Bill 1, prohibiting a person from knowingly wearing, carrying, or transporting a firearm onto the real property of another unless the other has given certain permission, prohibiting a person from wearing, carrying, or transporting a firearm under certain circumstances. So I thought that was interesting. House Bill 119, requiring each county board of education to follow the policy and guidelines for program instruction for public schools established by the State Board of Education. HB 283, requiring beginning January 1st, 2024, the Maryland Medical Assistance Program to provide gender-affirming treatment in a non-discriminatory fashion. And rounding out HB 33 and HB 359, HB 33 is regulating the use of biometric data by private entities. So if you do a fingerprint or a retina scan or whatever you use to do for a private company to get in, regulating how they can use that.
Yes.
And then HB 359, requiring certain interscholastic and intramural junior varsity and varsity athletic teams or sports sponsored by certain schools to be expressly designated based on biological sex.
I'm guessing that bill didn't move anywhere.
It did not move anywhere. My opinion, I don't know why it didn't move anywhere, but it didn't move anywhere.
No, that bill, not in the state of Maryland, that bill is not going to go anywhere. Take that to the state.
Oh, and by the way, number 6, back to your cannabis thing, renaming the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission to be the Alcohol, Tobacco, and what? Cannabis Commission.
ATC.
Yes, establishing a regulatory and licensing system for adult use cannabis. Of course, imposing sales and use tax on said use at certain rates.
I believe that commission is cannibalizing the commission that Terrence has been a part of, the Medical Marijuana Commission, which is winding down. I wish he was here to speak to that in regards to what the new structure is going to be like.
Cannabis, cannibal, I see what you did there.
But some of the other things that are coming out of session, Jim, Maryland voters are going to see reproductive rights on the ballot in 2024.
Yes, they are. That's an interesting one. So that's Senate Bill 798.
798, yes. So it'll be a referendum on the ballot in 2024 during the general election season.
Right, and it's important to note that Maryland still permits abortions in the wake of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision overturning Roe versus Wade. But I think they're looking to codify this with the people, getting the people's input.
Right.
And I suspect it has a very high probability of passing in our state of Maryland.
Well, if this type of legislation is passing in much more conservative states, I think it's going to be safe to say that it's going to pass here, because basically this would be added to the Declaration of Rights under the Maryland Constitution.
So let me ask you this. Does this stop the Roe v. Wade? I mean, there are going to be certain states that are going to say, can't do it.
Well,
right?
it stops it in the state of Maryland.
It stops it in the state of Maryland, but as you said, there are conservative states that are doing similar legislation.
Right.
So my point is, maybe even if you're pro-choice, maybe eliminating Roe v. Wade puts us back where it belongs, in the hands of the states. And by the way,
but if it's in the hand of the states, it's still up to be a political football, depending on who's controlling the chambers and what the demographic of the electorate looks like.
well, it is. It is. That's true.
And you're okay with that?
I'm more okay with that than dealing with this issue every 4 years as part of a federal election where it hasn't changed since it,
So instead of it being part of a federal election, it'll be a part of a state election.
Well, I think.
But in the state of Maryland, though, I don't see that as being the case. Like, because the state of Maryland is so heavily leaning towards Democrats, I think it will be a settled issue here. But in a state like, say, Wisconsin or somewhere else that's constantly, things are moving and changing, then it's something that will come up for probably debate every 4 years.
It might. But wouldn't you rather have that debated at the state level? Because we seem to be able to find common ground a little better at the state level than we do at the national level.
I can see the point in regards to this issue, but just historically speaking, I just have a few issues with states' rights. And we could have a whole show in talking about the historical perspective of some of the issues that I have with states' rights, but I'll leave that there. I'm looking at some of the money that's being included within this package, because Governor Hogan had withheld what it looked like $69 million from training funding, but the Moore administration came in and released that. Or they released $3.5 million to expand abortion training. That was a part of a package before. So there were some things that they came in on day one that they changed, and then obviously now they're trying to take this to the voters to codify it in the
Here's the other thing.
Constitution.
Here's the other thing. For those that would seek abortion, even if you live in a state where it's not legal, chances are there's a surrounding state where you can go and get those services.
True, but a lot of times when it's of folks of not of means, then the cost becomes prohibitive and a barrier, and desperate people do desperate things. And if it's a situation of life and death, then that could be problematic as well, because everyone doesn't have the ability to pack up and go to the next state.
That's a very good point.
Transportation and lodging, the support system of family and whomever. So there's some things there in regards to
that's a very good point.
Not being able to be a tax-paying citizen in your own community and receive those services. So there is that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. What the outcome of this is. I agree wholeheartedly with the notion of tossing this to the voters to decide.
Well, Again, I'm not betting you any steak dinners on this, right? But unless you're going to take the other side of this bet, because I'll go on the record today that that it's getting passed.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
I can't see the other side of that moving the needle here.
I think we should agree here that Terrence buys a steak dinner if it
Listen, as much time as Terrence has been off traveling the world, yes, he should be buying.
He owes us a steak dinner regardless.
Absolutely. The other article that we have here, Jim, is through the Maryland Reporter, and it's talking about Governor Moore embracing business but driving up costs as well. Kind of the Democratic way at times, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you love business coming in because it obviously, it grows revenue. It brings in more tax money. But there's another side to this issue in regards to Governor Moore. Speak to it.
Yeah. So the issue here is that everything has a cost, and these programs, if you for whatever reason on Facebook, I'm getting these Westmore commercials of own a small business, you qualify for X and Y and Z and A and B and C. And the fact of the matter is, whether it's deferred or eliminated tax debt or whatever the case is, it's going to cost more, and that is going to hurt the budget.
Yeah.
in Maryland.
What I grabbed out of this article is there was a survey done by Switch On Business, which is a company that specializes in helping startups. And what they found is Maryland is the 10th least cost-effective state to launch a startup
Today.
today.
And it's going to get,
And among those factors was a high corporate tax rate of 8.25%.
and there was
and a high
Forbes-
living wage, right?
And there was a Forbes article that suggested that Maryland was 35th in the ranking of best states for business, 35 not being
Right.
a good number in that case.
Right.
As compared to Virginia ranking 4th, which is our neighbor, and North Carolina, and CNBC ranks North Carolina number 1 and Virginia number 3.
Right. But it was just odd, though, right? Because South Dakota and Mississippi are the two most cost-effective states to start a business. But the survey is showing California, New York, New Jersey, and Maryland are all low. And Maryland ranks below California, New York, and New Jersey. Now, that's saying something if you rank below California.
Yeah.
In regards to those. So that's
Well, and the other thing, a couple other things on this bill. First of all, was this notion of codifying this family and medical leave insurance program that is scheduled to start in 2024, I believe. The collection will start in 2024. The benefits will start sometime after that. But employers will pay 50% of the contributions to that. So that's going to be a lot of money that employers will be now paying, just like Social Security and Medicare, and employees will pay 50%.
Yeah.
So these employees that are fighting for this family and medical leave, it's now going to cost them. This is an insurance policy, much like your life insurance policy or your long-term disability. You're going to pay 25% of this thing.
yeah.
So I don't know if they know that, and we don't know what 25%. I mean, if it's 25% of $100 a month, well, that's one thing. But if it's 25% of, $1,000 a month, that's a little different.
Yeah. The other thing that I came out of this article is that, whether it's conservative or liberal economists, they were disputing some of the kind of the facts or, the basis of this article, such as the liberal economists were debating high income earners that were leaving the state because of high state and local taxes. And the one thing that the writer of this article says is that he personally knows individuals that, have a residence here and have a residence in Florida, and they make sure that they stay in their residence in Florida 6 months and at least 1 day,
Right.
so that they have no income tax. So they can qualify for residency there. And, speaking anecdote, I can attest to that because I have clients that have homes in both, but they make sure that the majority of their time is spent in Florida in regards to that because of, the tax rate. So interesting article. So on the positive side, more businesses are starting up, but what's going to be their sustainability?
Well, that's the key, because this article from the Maryland Reporter suggests that this is not sustainable.
Right.
There's a potential $400 million write-down in state revenues for the next fiscal year.
Right.
And $400 million isn't a lot compared to a $62 million budget, but it's still money that you have to make up.
And and when we talk about that and we break that down, if we look at it local, I know that the city has championed a lot of businesses that started up in the downtown corridor, especially during COVID. But now that all the COVID money has dried up, other than little micro grants that they have the ability to do, and the fact that we're looking at an economic slowdown that's in front of us, as Terrence has been telling us for a year, as winter is coming. What's going to be the sustainability of these businesses? Because it's one thing to celebrate a business that is ribbon cutting, or when they celebrate their 1-year anniversary, but how many of these businesses are going to hit their 2? How many are going to hit their 5, their 10, their 15, and become long-term sustainable businesses in our community? Or, Will we see an instance that by the time that the stadium is in, we're going to see a whole new influx of businesses trying to make a go of it because those that came in the midst of COVID and the dollars dried up, they didn't have a sustainable customer base and weren't able to make it. So it'll be interesting to see how that works.
Well, the
out
other
on a
thing
local
that's
level.
interesting is Moore has signed on to the California plan to California law that all new cars in the state must be electric by 2035. Only 7% of the vehicles sold currently in this state are electric. Now, you can argue, there's a lot of arguments of the efficiency of electric over fossil fuel, some of which I believe, some of which I don't. But still, that's going to increase the cost. That's another cost that's going to increase because we're going to have to pay more for that. Yeah, a lot going on here.
So I was having a conversation with an insurance agent yesterday, and one of the things I came across on his LinkedIn, one of the positives in regards to electric vehicles normally weigh less.
Yes.
So from that standpoint, the damage in regards to accidents is lessened by the impact of more EVs on the road. So there is one positive that I had heard from that. But it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and we'll just have to figure out which EV company we're going to buy to take advantage of the fact of where the government's pushing us.
Well, we hope that some of our friends from the delegation and the Senate, including our new delegate,
Yes,
Brooke, will join us, and we have a new state senator as well.
we do.
So,
And
Mr.
Mike
McKay,
McKay.
yes.
Yeah.
So we'll hope that he'll
Well,
join us
let's
too.
let
and of
them
course,
come home, take their vacation, take a breather from the hard work,
right.
and then we'll hit them up in May and say, "Come on in and
And-
tell us what you got done."
Yeah, and Senator Quarterman has always been a friend of this show.
Yeah.
And has always presented great information to our viewers. So
Yeah.
we hope he's always invited.
And he was juggling a lot of balls. I talked to him early in session. He was trying to keep the I-81 money in. The things that he's been advocating for. I know that the stadium project needs some additional money because of inflation and some things like that to kind of keep that project moving in the right direction.
Yep.
So he was juggling a lot of balls and had a lot of responsibility. And, tomorrow when the capital budget, or Thursday, as the viewing of this show, we'll have a better sense of probably how successful he was and how Washington County made out as a whole.
Yep.
So let's take a break here, and we'll come back with an extended Fast Five. Is that what we're going to call it?
Fast 15.
Yeah, that's what we'll call it. All right, stay with us. We'll be back with Fast Five after the break. Welcome back to the show. Jim, let's jump into these last topics. First of all, let's start off a friend of the show. Deputy Election Director Barry Jackson has a promotion. He is now becoming the Election Director of Washington County because Kay Rabucci, if I have that correct.
Rabucci, I believe.
Rabucci, is retiring.
Yeah.
What say you?
I say that, first of all, to Ms. Rabucci, she's been with the election board, I believe, for 31 years, 14 of it as director. She has served this county and she served this electorate very well. I have no doubt that Mr. Jackson will not only follow in her footsteps, but have some exciting new ideas. He has been a friend of the show. He's been a friend of our viewers, because he has come on the show several times and talked about voter safety,
Yes.
talked about the system and how they've tried to assure that it is fair and that it is process driven and that every vote counts regardless of whether you mail it in, go in early, or vote at the polls on election day.
And they navigated the shortages of volunteers.
They navigated the shortages of volunteers. They navigated COVID.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can expect to see more good things from Mr. Jackson in his new role.
The one question I have, Jim, and I'm sure you can answer this, is this an appointed position? Is this a position that is normally selected by the county commissioners?
So they don't speak to who selected him or what the process is. I would
Right.
assume that the county commissioners have some level of involvement, but I can't speak to that. So I'm going to withhold because I just really don't know what the process is for for selecting the new director.
Right. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see, and obviously, that means we got to get Barry back on the show.
We do. By the way, he began his career as an election judge, right? One of those people that goes
Worked
in on
his
election
way
days,
up.
worked his way up, and his first early voting initiative was in 2010, and he has gotten administrator credentials, a graduate level certification from Auburn University. He is still pursuing a certified public official and certificate in public leadership credentials. So in addition to his vast set of skills, he's also seeking additional learning to make him even more effective in the job that he's going to be taking on.
And also,
by the way, he's also a veteran.
Yes. And kudos to Kay on a 31-year career.
Yes.
With the Board of Elections. She spent the last 14 years as the director. I'm sure these last years when election fraud has become more of the issue in dealing with COVID have been very, very interesting for her. But kudos to her on a long career, and I hope she has an amazing retirement. Next topic, Jim. Former Chief of Staff for Governor Hogan, Roy McGrath, was shot and killed in an interaction with police in Tennessee. He was a fugitive.
He was.
That was running from the law in regards to an indictment that he's received. What say you on this issue?
Well, first of all, to the best of my knowledge, we don't know whether the wound was self-inflicted or came as a result of exchange of gunfire with agents. So that has not been published yet. So I'm hesitant to suggest that he was killed by FBI agents because I don't think that information has been made public yet.
It just says an agent involved shooting.
Right.
So if he was being shot at and he self-inflicted gun wound, we don't know those details as of yet.
You know, there are certain things I think that everybody just says, this is something I don't ever want to do. And being hauled away on an indictment is certainly in my top three.
That you don't want.
That I don't want. So, and, you know, as someone who has had a very privileged life in his career up till now, I don't know how he would react to that. So I frankly will not be surprised if we do find out that it's suicide.
Yeah.
Because the notion of going to prison and going through that and putting your loved ones through it, and it's a sad situation.
The situation was, I mean, he wasn't Hogan's chief of staff for long.
No.
And part of what he was indicted for was that he was accused of securing a severance payment from his other government job to the tune of $233,000, equal to 1 year's salary when he was the head of the Maryland Environmental Service. But he was falsely saying that the governor had approved it. And then he was also accused of fraud and embezzlement connected to another $170,000. He didn't surrender police. He fled, and then they found him in Tennessee, and then this incident happened. But you know, the other thing that I think about in regards to Hogan's time in office, this is like the biggest scandal that came out of his administration.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's always scandal in government. I mean, you know, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. You know, some of the rumor circles, you know, I've heard talk about how Hogan may have been involved in different things like that. But it looks like he ran a pretty clean government.
Yeah. So this gentleman was 53 years old.
Yeah.
If he was convicted on the federal charges, and there were a total of 4 of them, plus a maximum of 10 years for each of 2 counts of embezzling funds, those 4 charges, the 4 main charges, would have held a maximum sentence of 20 years each. You know, he had the real possibility of spending
the rest of his productive life in prison,
if not his entire life.
Yeah. So I'm sure more details are going to come out around the interaction with the FBI in regards to the circumstances of his death, but a sad chapter comes to an end.
It is. Of interest is that I've seen several posts on Facebook and other social media that apparently this was a very amicable guy, and I'm not taking lightly the notion of what he was accused of doing, but yeah, it's just sad.
Yeah.
It's odd if indeed he did do the things he's accused of. It always makes me wonder why people choose those paths.
Those desperate measures.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jim, the next article comes from the Maryland Reporter, as one of our earlier articles is, and the title is "Two Counties Move to Healthier School Start Times. How does the rest of Maryland compare?" What say you?
Yeah, so first of all, unless I misread this report, I'm not seeing that it's all that much healthy. What is healthy? Healthy, I think.
And who determines if it's healthy?
Right, and I think they're determining healthy by they start later. I don't know how I feel about this, and I would have to dig more into data on what makes it healthy to go to school at 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning versus unhealthy to go to school at 7:30 in the morning.
Well, I'm looking at this, and they're talking about a study from the University of Minnesota in regards to sleep deprivation in adolescents.
But okay, I saw that, but here's the problem. If the students have to go to school at 7:30 in the morning, let's say they say 11 o'clock, I'm done.
That doesn't mean that they're going to
If you
abide
move
by
it
that
till
schedule in their
8:30,
home.
if
right?
you move it school start till 8:30, I would argue that most teenagers are going to say, "All right,
I'm gonna
another
stay
hour up."
Yes.
So I'm not sure that moving the school time fixes that problem. If anything, I think it might make it worse. But then again, I'm not a scientist, so.
But this is what they were alluding to, is that, teenagers experience a shift in their basically their biological clocks.
And they
or
need
the
10 hours
internal
of sleep.
rhythm.
Right.
And they get tired later at night and wake up later in the morning, and earlier school times force students to ignore their biological needs.
Okay.
So when is our employer going to start worrying about our biological
I don't want
needs?
my employer to worry about my biological needs. I am more than happy
You're
not
happy
to
to
work
handle
all
that.
of my evening not to work all of my evening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't want them to deal with that.
Yeah, and also speaks to this. The Center of Disease Control and Prevention recommends that high school age students get 8 to 10 hours of sleep.
Right. Well, they do on the weekends because they
Yeah.
go to bed at midnight and don't get up till 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Or in the summer.
Yeah, exactly. So they, you can't make up sleep. I know that, but they do a good job trying in the summer. At least my kids
my daughters
do.
got plenty of sleep during COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got plenty of sleep when there was nothing to do. But you still have a high school student. Is your daughter getting 10 hours of sleep?
Sometimes on the weekends.
Yeah.
And the reality is, she'll come home and take a nap.
Yeah.
She'll come home, do her homework, and then she'll take a nap. So.
Well, most days my daughters have activities after school, so there's no 10 hours of sleep. If they're fortunate and don't have something on a Saturday, there's a lazy time, or the few times that there's not travel or something involved on a Sunday, that's possible. But there are not many 10-hour sleep days. The only person that's getting 10 hours of sleep, and that's my son, when he chooses to stay down.
Yeah.
Well, as of this show, we've had our last article is talking about Trump raising $4 million since his indictment. Tuesday, he surrendered to police. We had the spectacle of that on television. It's become a big fundraising thing for him. And then he also had an opportunity to speak to his supporters at Mar-a-Lago once he returned from New York. What say you, Jim?
I think that this is a specific indication of a broader potential outcome for this. There are those that are Trump haters who think this is going to silence him, and it's not. It's going to give him more free media, which is how he won the election the first time. I don't believe he will go to jail. I don't believe that.
No, hold there. You don't think he'll go to jail on this charge or any of the other charges that are going to come?
Well, I don't believe he'll go to jail on this charge.
Okay.
I can only speak to what he's been indicted on.
Okay.
At this point.
Okay.
But I think the more, these Trump haters are propping this guy up. They really are. And yes, he raised $4 million. My guess is, now that was as of Tuesday, right? So it's Wednesday when we're taping the show. He probably raised another X dollars before that. And I know you're going to tell me that we have short memories in this country, and we do. But this guy is not going to. This guy will continue to remind us of that. He is.
But here's the thing, though, Jim. Trump has basically lost every election that he has had his hands on since he was elected. The midterm elections, the next presidential election, the next midterm elections, he has not been winning. His candidates have not been winning. Just because raising money is good for Trump I don't believe that has any indication on how he would fare in a general electorate if he made it to a general election.
Oh.
It is obvious that the base is still with him.
It is.
But it's been to their detriment.
But
the Republicans have been losing elections drastically. I don't think this is much of an impact on the country. This is still an implosion of the Republican Party.
And you may be right.
Because again, we sat here all of last year leading up until the election, and we were all predicting this red wave that was coming. That did not come.
It came in Washington County, saving and accepting Brooke Grossman.
Right. But that's Washington County.
Right. But it didn't come anywhere else, and I agree with that.
Right.
I think there's a larger question here. And forgive me for this diatribe. I think politics, starting in 1997, or at least that's as far back as I can remember it, till today, have been both sides climbing up the crazy ladder. The Salem witch trials are back. They're just in Washington, D.C. now. And we can't afford that anymore. We've got 567,000 homeless people in this country as of 2019. 33.8 million people in poverty, 6.5 million families in poverty. We have 38.29 million people who are food insecure. That's 10.5% of the households that don't know how they're going to feed their kids. God, Reggie, what the hell are we doing? We talk about abortions. We had 630,000 abortions on average for the last couple of years. 85% of those were unmarried. 42% of those have had more than one abortion. And by the way, 38% were black, non-Hispanic. And for those, and we know that a higher percentage of the percentages of black Americans are in the poor zone. So if we do all of the state stuff, to your point earlier, how do they get those services if they indeed need them or want them? What are we doing here? 21,000 homicides in 2019, 922,000 aggravated assaults, 244,000 robberies, 126,000 rapes, $31.6 trillion in debt, 120.35% of gross domestic product. That's $95,000 per citizen, but that includes everyone, including your son, who can't contribute at this point. So if you take it per taxpayer, it's $246,000. We have serious problems in this country, and we need serious leaders to fix them. But all we can do is witch hunt. Whether you're talking about Bill Clinton and blue dresses and cigars, or George Bush and WMDs, or Barack Obama and whether he's a citizen or not, or Hillary's emails, or Trump's paying off a porn star. How does this help our country? We spend every day in the U.S. Congress having hearings on stuff that will have no benefit for 99.9% of Americans. We've got to stop this.
I agree with you on many points, but I think as a country we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Well,
And-
we're not walking and chewing gum at the same time. We're out spending all of our money trying to kill the next guy.
but this is happening in New York. This is not the federal government's case from that standpoint.
It's still politically driven.
That's one aspect of it. But again, from the Republican standpoint, Republicans are very concerned about election integrity. And election integrity is not who's voting and who's not voting and if it's citizens voting. Election integrity is that if the former president had a scheme with the national known publication to kill stories that provided information to the voters to make decisions, that belongs in the conversation of election integrity as well. And if you also did that to falsify tax records, all of that is encompassing. So if we're going to have election integrity, let's have it all the way around. And this is a piece of election
we're not.
integrity.
Because there are equal issues on the other side.
Well,
And
there are
right now,
equal
we're not
issues, but
talking about this.
election integrity, there's the case that's coming out of Georgia that's even far more problematic when it comes to election integrity in regards to, it's proposed that the next case is going to come when former President Trump was asking for one more vote than what he needed. In a phone call that we've heard for the last couple of years. I mean, that's clear as day on camera. I get your point in regards to these things, but those things don't change until our behavior as voters change.
Well, that's right.
Right, and that's not a national problem, it's a local problem as well, right? When voters start to research candidates, understand the process, and hopefully we, as those that are kind of reporting this information to the public, the way that we're digging into the budget, the way that we're talking about things in Annapolis, hopefully we're encouraging voters to look more into the details. Because, one of the things that you and I talked about off camera is how each side celebrates their politician in Annapolis, like, great job down there doing the people's work. And you look and you see that they really haven't gotten anything accomplished, but people like to celebrate their person that has a D or an R next to the name. That gives them comfort as opposed to what they may have accomplished. So until our voters' behavior changes, none of this is going to change. Because the problem is each side wants to win. So if there's no reason that Democrats don't think this is a winning issue. It doesn't matter if Trump raises money. Trump has always been able to raise money, and he's been able to get money from the poorest of citizens. But it's not good for the country, it's good for Trump. And Trump
But
loses.
neither is this good for the country.
It's not good for the
Whether
country. But
Bill
for,
Clinton or George W. Bush or Barack Obama.
You're right. But to that point, though, it's a winning issue for Democrats, so they're going to go down that road. And whatever Republicans find that they think that is a good issue for them, they're going to go down that road. But at this point, Republicans are being very quiet about this because they're afraid of the Trump base and the attack that they would receive if they went against him. So they celebrate him and say this is wrong, while they're still trying to beat him in the end.
But the other thing they're trying to do, and we're getting snapped that we're out of time, but the other thing they're trying to do is figure out what the next rung on the crazy ladder looks like so they can go attack their Democratic colleagues.
Absolutely. But
That's all I
again,
got.
until we change, they won't change. Until there has to be another level of accountability from the citizens. So. But we'll have to solve this another week. We didn't get it done today, my friend.
No, we didn't.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have for tonight. We hope that you'll like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and send us your comments to feedback@theflipsidetv.com. That is feedback@theflipsidetv.com. But most importantly, join us again next week for another episode of